53 cents. That is what $1 from the year 2000 is worth today. Not 53 cents because someone stole the rest. Not 53 cents because of a market crash or a recession or a bad investment. 53 cents because something invisible, something that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single day of your life, has been eating your money while you sleep. It has no face, it sends no bill, it does not knock on your door, and yet it has taken nearly half of every dollar you have ever earned and turned it into air. Warren Buffett called it the most devastating tax in history, and almost nobody treats it like one. This is not a video about economics. This is a video about your grocery bill, your rent, your savings account, and the retirement you think you are building. What inflation does to money is something every school should teach, and almost none of them do. Because understanding it changes everything about how you save, how you spend, and how you invest. Buffett has been warning about this for over 50 years. He wrote about it in 1977. He wrote about it again in 2024. The message has not changed because the threat has not changed. It just keeps compounding, silently, relentlessly, against you. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how much inflation has already cost you, why the strategies most people use to protect their money are actually accelerating the damage, and what Buffett does differently, the specific types of investments he buys that do not just survive inflation, but feed on it. Stay to the end, because the last section changes how you look at every dollar you own. Inflation is not complicated. A bottle of water costs $2 today. Next year it costs $2.05. The year after that, $2.10. Nothing about the water changed. Same bottle, same water, same factory. The only thing that changed is the number on the price tag. That is inflation. The slow, constant increase in prices over time that makes every dollar in your pocket worth a little less than it was yesterday. Economists debate the causes. Politicians blame each other. But the effect on your life is simple and brutal. Everything gets more expensive, while the dollars you earn stay roughly the same size. If this is the kind of financial breakdown you have been looking for, subscribe to this channel. We turn the complicated into the obvious, no jargon, no fluff. Buffett wrote about this in 1977, and his words still hit harder than anything published since. He said that the arithmetic makes it plain that inflation is a far more devastating tax than anything enacted by any legislature. A far more devastating tax. Think about that comparison. People get angry about income tax. They protest sales tax. They hire accountants to minimize property tax. But the tax that does the most damage, the one that runs silently in the background consuming capital without sending a single invoice, most people do not even think about it. They feel it at the grocery store. They feel it at the gas pump. They feel it when rent goes up, but they do not name it, and what you do not name, you cannot fight. There is a math trick that shows how fast inflation works, and almost nobody knows it. It is called the rule of 72. You take the number 72 and divide it by the inflation rate. The result is how many years it takes for your purchasing power to be cut in half. At today's rate of about 2.5%, 72 divided by 2.5 equals roughly 29 years. Your money loses half its value in less than 3 decades. But in 2022, when inflation hit 8%, that number dropped to 9 years. 9 years to cut your wealth in half without touching a single dollar. That is the speed most people never calculate, because if they did, they would never leave money sitting still again. Here is how it plays out in the real world. A gallon of gas cost about $1.50 in the year 2000. Today, it costs roughly $3. A gallon of milk was about $2.70. Today, it is over $4. A movie ticket was $5.39. Today, the average is over 11. None of these products improved. Gas still makes your car go. Milk still tastes like milk. The movie is still 2 hours in a dark room. The only thing that changed is how many dollars it takes to buy them, because each dollar you hold has been shrinking every single day since the moment you earned it. The government measures inflation through something called the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. It tracks roughly 80,000 prices across thousands of stores every month. Food, energy, housing, healthcare, transportation, education. They weight each category by how much the average household spends on it, blend the numbers together, and produce a single percentage. That is the official inflation rate. But here is the part they do not advertise. The CPI is an average. Your personal inflation rate might be completely different. If you spend more on healthcare than the average person, your inflation is higher. If your rent has doubled in 5 years, the CPI number of 2.5% does not describe your life at all. It describes a statistical fiction that smooths out the pain. Buffett has pointed out something about inflation that economists often overlook. He said that high rates of inflation create a tax on capital that makes much corporate investment unwise, at least when measured by the standard of a real return. That means inflation does not just shrink the dollars in your wallet, it raises the bar for every investment you make. If inflation is running at 3%, any investment returning less than 3% is losing money, even if the account statement shows a positive number. The number is nominal, the reality is real, and the gap between nominal and real is where inflation does its quiet, invisible damage. Think of inflation like a river current that always flows in one direction, against you. If you swim at the same speed as the current, you stay in place. If you swim slower, you drift backwards even though you are working hard. Most people look at their paycheck and see a number that grows every year. They feel like they are making progress, but the current is pulling them back at nearly the same speed. Between 2006 and 2025, nominal wages in America grew by almost 79%. Sounds incredible until you adjust for inflation. Real wages, what your money can actually buy, grew by 12% over 19 years. That is less than 1% per year of actual improvement. You worked harder every year, your paycheck grew every year, and your life barely changed. That is the current. The people at the bottom feel it worst. Researchers at Brookings tracked real wage growth across income levels since 2000. The bottom 10% of earners, the people who can least afford to lose purchasing power, saw their real wages grow by 3% over 2 decades, 3% in 20 years. Meanwhile, the top 10% saw almost 16% real growth. Inflation is not an equal tax. It hits hardest at the bottom, where every dollar matters more and where there is no surplus to invest in things that outrun it. The wealthy own assets that rise with inflation, stocks, real estate, businesses. The poor hold cash and wages that do not. The same force affects everyone. The outcomes are worlds apart. If you are starting to see this tax in places you never noticed before, write in the comments, "I see the hidden tax." Because awareness is the first line of defense. Now here is the part that genuinely angers Buffett, and should anger you. Every financial advisor, every bank advertisement, every well-meaning parent has told you the same thing since you were a child. Save your money. Put it in a savings account. Let it sit there and grow. It sounds responsible. It sounds safe. It is the single worst piece of financial advice most people will ever follow, because a savings account does not grow your money. It shrinks it, slowly, quietly, while showing you a number on a screen that goes up just enough to make you feel like something good is happening. The average savings account in America pays 0.01% interest per year. That is not a typo. 1/100th of 1%. Put $10,000 in that account, and after a full year, you have earned $1. $1. Meanwhile, inflation at 2.5% has erased $250 of your purchasing power. You are down $249 in real terms, but the bank statement says you gained $1. The statement is technically correct and practically a lie. You did not save money. You paid the bank to watch your money evaporate. Buffett explained this with a clarity that should be carved into the wall of every bank lobby in America. He said, "It makes no difference to a widow with her savings in a 5% passbook account whether she pays 100% income tax on her interest during a period of 0 inflation or pays no income tax during years of 5% inflation. The result is the same. The purchasing power is gone." Most people understand that taxes take your money. Almost nobody understands that inflation does the exact same thing, except nobody votes for it, nobody debates it, and nobody sends you a receipt. Even high-yield savings accounts, the ones that currently pay around 4 to 5%, are barely treading water. When inflation runs at 2.5% and your account pays 4%, your real return is 1.5%. That sounds better than losing money, and it is. But 1.5% real return means your $10,000 has the purchasing power of $10,150 after a year. At that rate, it takes 48 years to double your money in real terms. You will be dead before your savings account makes you meaningfully wealthier. That is not a savings strategy. That is a waiting room with no doctor coming. The cruelest part of the savings lie is who it hurts most. People who follow the rules, people who skip the vacation and put the money in the bank instead, people who drive the old car and deposit the difference, people who do everything they were taught to do and watch their discipline get eaten alive by a force they were never taught to account for. Inflation does not punish recklessness. It punishes obedience. It punishes the person who trusts the system without understanding the math behind it, and the math is unforgiving. Between 2020 and 2024, food prices in America increased by 23.6%. Housing is up over 45% in 5 years. Healthcare spending has exploded from $1.4 trillion in 2000 to $5.3 trillion today, a 278% increase. During that same period, worker earnings grew by about 64%. Do you see the gap? The things you need to survive, food, shelter, medical care, are inflating 2 to 4 times faster than your ability to pay for them. A savings account earning 0.01% is not just losing to inflation, it is being lapped, repeatedly, without a finish line in sight. If this is making you rethink where your money sits, hit the like button. It helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. Walk into any grocery store and run this experiment. Pick up a dozen eggs. In the year 2000, that carton cost about 90 cents. Today, the national average is over $3.50. That is not a 300% increase in egg quality. The chickens did not get 3 times better at their job. The carton did not triple in value. What happened is the dollar you used to buy those eggs lost so much of its weight that you now need almost 4 of them to do what one used to do. Every aisle in the store tells the same story. Bread, milk, chicken, beef, cereal. The prices are screaming at you, but because they go up slowly, a few cents here, a quarter there, your brain adjusts without registering the damage. There is a term for what companies do when they cannot raise prices without losing customers. They call it shrinkflation. Instead of charging you more for the same product, they charge you the same amount for less product. That bag of chips that used to weigh 16 ounces now weighs 13. The roll of toilet paper has fewer sheets. The ice cream container shrank from half a gallon to 1.5 quarts, which sounds almost the same until you do the math and realize you're getting 6.25% less for the same price. Your eyes see the same price tag. Your hand picks up a smaller package. And nobody at the checkout says a word because the receipt looks exactly the same as it did last month. A gallon of gas tells the story of 25 years in one number. In 2000, the national average was about $1.50. By 2010, it had nearly doubled to $2.80. By 2022, it hit $3.95. Today, it sits around $3. Every time you fill up your tank, you are witnessing inflation in real time, paying twice what your parents paid for the same chemical reaction that moves your car the same distance at the same speed. The gas did not improve, your dollar deteriorated, and the difference between those two sentences is the entire lesson of this chapter. College tuition makes the grocery store look gentle. In 2000, a year at a public university cost less than $4,000. Today it costs over $9,700. Private universities went from $15,000 to over $38,000, a 148% increase. The annual rate of tuition inflation since 2000 is roughly 7%. That is nearly 3 times the general inflation rate, which means that while the cost of everything went up, the cost of the thing your children need to compete in the job market went up 3 times faster. A parent saving for their child's education in a savings account earning 0.01% is not falling behind. They are sprinting backwards. Healthcare makes college look affordable. Total healthcare spending in America went from $1.4 trillion in 2000 to $5.3 trillion today. Worker premium contributions, the amount that comes out of your paycheck for health insurance, went up 308%. During the same period, worker earnings grew by 119%. That gap, the distance between what healthcare costs and what you earn, has been widening every single year for a quarter century. And it compounds. A 3% annual gap between healthcare inflation and wage growth does not just add up. It multiplies. Every year the gap is wider than the year before. By the time you retire, the math is so far apart that the word affordable stops meaning anything. The median home price in the United States was around $120,000 in 2000. Today, it is over $419,000. For people who already owned a home, that was the best inflation hedge of their lives. Their biggest asset tripled in value, but for everyone trying to buy their first home, it was a disaster. Wages did not triple. Savings accounts did not triple. Down payments did not become 3 times easier to accumulate. The housing market is a perfect illustration of how inflation creates 2 classes, the protected and the exposed. If you own assets, inflation is your silent partner. If you do not, inflation is your silent enemy. And the gap between those 2 groups gets wider every single year. Buffett once said that when you combine ignorance and leverage, you get some pretty interesting results. The same is true when you combine ignorance and inflation. Most people do not sit down with a calculator and track what their money can actually buy compared to 5 or 10 years ago. They look at their paycheck, see a bigger number, and assume they are doing better. But the paycheck is nominal. The groceries are real. The rent is real. The gas is real. And the distance between what you earn and what things cost is the only measurement that matters. If you are not measuring that distance, you are flying blind. And the runway is getting shorter every year. If you are watching this and the numbers are starting to land, if you can feel the gap between what you thought your money was doing and what it has actually been doing, there is something for you in the first pinned comment. It is for people who are done being on the losing side of this equation. What makes inflation truly dangerous is not the rate itself. It is the acceleration, the way small numbers compound into enormous damage over time without anyone noticing until the damage is done. 2.5% per year sounds manageable. It sounds like nothing. But compounding works on inflation just like it works on investments, except in reverse. Instead of your money growing on top of itself, the erosion erodes on top of itself. Year 1, you lose 2.5%. Year 2, you lose 2.5% of what was already diminished. By year 30, at that steady rate, your purchasing power has been cut nearly in half. Not by a crisis, not by a catastrophe, by normalcy operating exactly as designed. Where does the money go? That question matters more than most people realize. When you pay income tax, the money goes to the government. When you pay sales tax, it goes to the state. But when inflation takes your purchasing power, where does it go? The answer is everywhere and nowhere. It goes to the people who printed the money. It goes to the people who own assets that rise with inflation. It goes to the borrowers whose debts become easier to repay with cheaper dollars. In other words, inflation transfers wealth from savers to borrowers, from workers to owners, from the cautious to the leveraged. It is the largest wealth transfer in human history, and it happens so slowly that the people on the losing end rarely realize they are subsidizing the people on the winning end. The Federal Reserve controls the money supply in the United States. When they need to stimulate the economy, they print money, or more precisely, they create it digitally by purchasing government bonds and injecting cash into the banking system. In 2020 and 2021, the M2 money supply, which tracks all the cash, checking accounts, and easily convertible near money in the economy, exploded upward at a rate never seen in peacetime. Trillions of dollars appeared in the system that did not exist before. The consequence arrived 12 months later. In 2022, inflation hit 8%, the highest in 40 years. More money chasing the same goods equals higher prices. That is not economics. That is arithmetic. When inflation accelerates, something economists call the wage price spiral kicks in. Workers see prices rising and demand higher pay. Companies grant the raises, but then raise their own prices to cover the higher labor costs. Customers see higher prices, workers demand more pay, and the cycle feeds itself. Each loop makes the next loop worse. Breaking the spiral requires the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates aggressively, which slows the economy, increases unemployment, and causes real pain for millions of people. The cure for inflation feels like punishment, which is why governments prefer to let it run a little hot rather than impose the discipline needed to cool it down. And a little hot has a way of becoming a lot hotter before anyone intervenes. There is a number that most people have never calculated and should. Take your annual expenses, every dollar that leaves your account in a year. Multiply that by the inflation rate. That is how much more your life will cost next year just to stay in exactly the same place. If you spend $60,000 a year and inflation runs at 3%, you need an extra $1,800 next year just to maintain the same lifestyle. Not to improve it, not to save more, not to invest, just to stand still. Over 10 years at that rate, your $60,000 lifestyle costs over $80,000. Over 20 years, over $108,000. The escalator never stops. And if your income does not escalate at the same pace, you do not notice a dramatic collapse. You notice a slow, quiet shrinking of what you can afford. One less dinner out per month. One fewer vacation per year. The car lasting 2 years longer than you planned. Death by 1,000 invisible cuts. Buffett saw this play out on a national scale and called it exactly what it is. He said that if you feel you can dance in and out of securities in a way that defeats the inflation tax, he would like to be your broker, but not your partner. The joke carries a blade. He's saying that nobody, not the smartest hedge fund manager, not the most sophisticated algorithm, can consistently outmaneuver inflation through trading. The only defense is structural. It has to be built into the foundation of how you hold and grow money. Anything else is a dance on a floor that is sinking beneath your feet. Consider what inflation means for retirement, the chapter of your life where you stop earning and start spending. If you retire at 65 with $1 million and inflation runs at 3%, your purchasing power drops to $740,000 in real terms within 10 years. In 20 years, $550,000. In 30 years, which is entirely possible if you retire healthy at 65, your $1 million buys what $340,000 would buy today. You did not spend recklessly. You did not make bad investments. You simply lived long enough for the hidden tax to eat more than half of everything you saved. Most retirement calculators do not emphasize this. They show you the big number at 65 and let you feel good about it. They do not show you what that number buys at 85. The velocity of inflation also changes the psychology of money. When prices are stable, people plan. They budget, they save, they think long-term. When inflation accelerates, behavior shifts. People rush to buy things now before prices go up. They take on more debt because they expect to repay it with cheaper dollars later. They stop saving because saving feels like losing. The entire relationship between a person and their money warps under inflationary pressure, and the decisions people make during those periods often lock in damage that lasts decades. Panic purchases, adjustable-rate mortgages signed in desperation, retirement accounts raided to cover rising costs. These are not irrational decisions. They are rational responses to an irrational environment. And that environment is created by forces most people have zero control over. So the question becomes, if inflation is inevitable, if it never stops, if it erodes everything from your savings to your salary to your retirement, what do you actually do about it? This is where Buffett separates himself from almost every other investor on the planet. He does not try to predict inflation. He does not hedge against it with complicated derivatives or gold futures. He buys businesses, specific kinds of businesses. Businesses that have one quality he considers more valuable than almost anything else in economics: the ability to raise prices without losing customers. He calls it pricing power. And he has said publicly that if you have to choose one single attribute to evaluate a business, that is the one. Because a company that can raise its prices in line with inflation, or faster than inflation, is not a victim of the hidden tax. It is a beneficiary. Think about what that means in practical terms. When inflation pushes the cost of raw materials up, most businesses face a terrible choice: absorb the cost and shrink their margins, or pass it to customers and risk losing sales. Companies without pricing power get crushed from both sides. But a company with a product people need, or a brand people trust so deeply that they will pay whatever the new price is, that company raises its price, maintains its margin, and keeps generating the same profit in real terms. The inflation that destroys a savings account actually feeds a business like this. Every time the dollar weakens, the company adjusts upward and keeps running. Buffett understood this before most investors were even thinking about inflation as an investment variable, and he built his entire portfolio around it. Coca-Cola is the clearest example in Buffett's portfolio and one of the most powerful inflation shields ever assembled by a single company. Berkshire Hathaway bought its stake in Coca-Cola in 1988 for approximately $1.3 billion. At the time, people called it an overpay. Today, that position generates over $700 million per year in dividends alone, more than half the original purchase price returned every single year. The product has not changed. The formula is the same brown liquid it was in 1886. What changed is the price on the label. In 1988, a can of Coke cost about 50 cents. Today, it costs nearly $2. Coca-Cola raised its price every year, and almost nobody switched to another drink. That is pricing power. That is inflation working for Buffett instead of against him. See's Candies is the example Buffett loves to teach with because the numbers are so clean. He bought the company in 1972 for $25 million. At the time, Seas generated about $4 million in pre-tax profit on roughly $30 million in sales. Over the next 5 decades, Buffett raised the price of a box of chocolates almost every single year. Customers kept buying, not because the chocolate changed. It did not. Because the brand carried enough emotional weight that people would pay whatever the new number was. By the 2000s, Seas was generating over $80 million in annual pre-tax profit on a business that required almost no additional capital investment. Buffett poured virtually nothing back in. He just raised the price and collected the profit. Inflation made the chocolate more expensive. The customer paid it. And Buffett kept the difference. What Buffett avoids with equal conviction tells you just as much as what he buys. He has been vocal for decades about the danger of holding long-term bonds during inflationary periods. A bond is a promise to pay you a fixed amount of money in the future. If you buy a 30-year government bond paying 3% and inflation runs at 3%, your real return is zero. You waited 30 years to break even. If inflation runs higher, which it did in the 70s and again in 2022, your real return goes negative. You are paying the government to hold your money and give you back less purchasing power than you started with. Buffett wrote in his 2012 letter to shareholders that bonds should come with a warning label. He said they are among the most dangerous of assets. Not because they default, government bonds almost never do, but because their fixed payments are denominated in a currency that loses value every single year. The payment stays the same. The world gets more expensive. And the bondholder sits in the middle, watching both sides move against them. Real estate occupies an interesting position in the inflation conversation. On one hand, property values tend to rise with inflation, making home ownership one of the most reliable hedges available to ordinary people. If you bought a house for $200,000 and inflation doubled the price of everything over 20 years, your house is now worth $400,000, while your fixed-rate mortgage payment stayed exactly the same. You are repaying old debt with cheaper dollars while sitting on an asset that inflated alongside everything else. On the other hand, for people who do not yet own property, inflation makes the barrier higher every year. The down payment grows faster than they can save. The monthly payment expands beyond what their wages support. Real estate is an inflation shield, but only for those who got through the door before inflation locked it. For everyone still outside, it is another wall that grows taller with every passing year. There is a category of business Buffett prizes above almost every other, companies that generate enormous profits while requiring very little reinvestment. He calls them capital-light businesses. A factory that needs to spend $50 million every few years just to replace aging equipment is exposed to inflation in a way that a software company or a brand-driven consumer business is not. Every time inflation pushes the cost of equipment higher, the factory's real profits shrink, even if its revenue grows. But a company like See's Candies, which needs almost no capital to maintain operations, converts nearly all of its revenue into distributable profit. When inflation rises, the company raises its prices, collects the difference, and sends the cash to Omaha. No new factories, no expensive upgrades, just cash flowing upward while the dollar flows downward. Buffett has said that the best businesses in an inflationary world are the ones that require the least amount of capital to grow. For the average person watching this who does not have the ability to buy entire companies, Buffett has offered a simple answer, and he has offered it repeatedly in shareholder meetings, in interviews, and in his annual letters. Buy a low-cost index fund, specifically an S&P 500 index fund. He told the shareholders at Berkshire's annual meeting that for most people the best thing to do is own a cross-section of American business, and the cheapest and most efficient way to do that is through an index fund. The logic connects directly to inflation. The 500 largest companies in America, as a group, have pricing power. They raise prices, they grow earnings, they adapt. Over any 20-year period in history, the S&P 500 has outpaced inflation by a wide margin. Not because every company in it is great, but because the index constantly replaces the weak with the strong, and the strong are the ones that can raise their prices. The entire lesson of this video comes down to a single structural truth. You cannot save your way out of inflation. You can only own your way out. Savings accounts, checking accounts, money under the mattress, bonds paying fixed rates, all of these lose to inflation over any meaningful time period. The only things that survive are assets that rise in price alongside everything else or faster, stocks in companies with pricing power, real estate purchased before the market moved beyond your reach, businesses that generate cash without consuming it. Buffett did not build his fortune by finding secret tricks or timing the market perfectly. He built it by owning things that inflation could not destroy, things that inflation actually made more valuable. That is not a strategy, that is a structural position. And it is available to anyone who understands the difference between holding dollars and holding assets that dollars chase. Ask yourself a question that most people avoid. Where is your money right now? Is it sitting in a savings account, earning 0.01%? Is it locked in a bond, paying 3% while inflation runs at 3%? Is it in a checking account that has not earned a penny of interest since you opened it? Every dollar that sits in those places is being taxed. Every single day, without a bill, without a notice, without your permission. Buffett saw this 60 years ago and structured everything he owns around it. You do not need his net worth to apply the same principle. You need to understand that cash is not safety. Cash is a slow leak, and the only way to stop the leak is to move your money into things that grow when prices grow, not things that sit still while the world gets more expensive around them. There is a reason Buffett still talks about inflation in his 90s. It is not because the problem is new, it is because the problem never ends. Every generation has to learn it for themselves, and most of them learn it too late, after the damage is already locked in. The median American has most of their net worth in their home and most of their savings in a bank account. One of those keeps up with inflation, the other one does not. And the distance between those two facts is the distance between building wealth and watching it evaporate. Buffett cannot protect your money for you. No one can. But understanding the tax, naming it, measuring it, refusing to ignore it, is the first step toward making sure the next 25 years do not cost you what the last 25 already have. The hidden tax is not going away. It does not take vacations. It does not care about elections, recessions, or pandemics. It runs constantly, and the only question is whether you are positioned on the side that benefits or the side that pays. Everything in this video was designed to show you which side you are standing on right now, and what it takes to cross to the other one. The math is not complicated. The assets are not secret. The information is not hidden. The only thing standing between most people and a real defense against inflation is the decision to stop treating their dollars like something permanent and start treating them like something that is disappearing a little more every day. Because they are. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I choose the other side." There is another video on your screen right now, the next piece of how money really works. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.